All right, give me one. Oh, let go. There it is. Give me 1 second, and we will be good to go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the August edition of the National At Home Dad Network's monthly webinar series. I want to thank everybody for coming to join us, those that are watching us live on Facebook right now, as well as those who will be watching the replay of this and checking it out on YouTube later. Today, we are joined by, excuse me, by Darnell Davis. Darnell gave a speech to one of our other members in the organization with his Masonic Lodge and really impressed him. And he got me connected with him. And he's going to talk about the concept of building resilience and how to prioritize men's mental health. I know as a stay-at-home dad, I deal with the isolation, the societal going against the societal norms for most men that are out there, and it comes with a lot of pressures. And for a lot of men, mental health is kind of a taboo topic, but it shouldn't be because it's something that we all need to be concerned about. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Darnell, and please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this field and what you're doing, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for the warm introduction. So I am actually a second year doctoral student at Howard University, and my line of work actually focuses around molecular biology. And so from there, obviously, there's this huge gap between like molecular biology and mental health, but my interest in it came when, upon leaving the military, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, right? And so, in addition to past traumas, in addition to war, and dealing with those posts, I actually I sought out different forms of help. I actually was really interested in learning more about the healthier alternatives to learning and how to deal and manage with my emotions and how to perceive the world and ultimately heal, right? And so the beauty about these types of programs in this field, this realm of mental health, especially as it pertains to us as men, right, is that, like you said earlier, there is a huge stigma. There's a lot of conversations because of that are not being had, and unfortunately, we internalize a lot of this and we end up suffering in silence. And so it doesn't take away from my passion for, molecular virology and molecular diagnostics and the world of STEM. But what mental health does is it gives me this really broad and fantastic tool set with not just how to help myself, but also to heal and promote options for others, because ultimately I believe that we benefit from knowing what's out there and how we're able to make the best decision possible for us. And so I gave a similar talk at my lodge. The brothers really loved it. I was approached to give a similar talk. Now, the good news is that it is modified is for the better. I think the audience and the target message is still very applicable to what I understand this group to be here. And so I have a presentation ready to actually help walk us through some of that process. So I don't know how I can share the slides, but
Let's see. You should be able, if you go up to the top, there should be a little computer screen.
Okay.
A camera, a microphone, computer screen. That's the share screen button.
Oh, here it is. Let's see. Maybe this is it.
Yeah,
Okay,
there
is
you
everyone
go.
able to see my screen okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And so, again, the first thing I really want to do is I would like to thank everybody for attending this conversation. And I say conversation because when we look at men's mental health, right? And so, for a lot of people, depending on your community, depending on your background, this concept is fairly new, but it is unfortunately a topic that we don't find ourselves allowing ourselves to talk about more or enough, right? And the reason for that is because of how it's perceived in the United States, specifically with in regards to how it is stigmatized. As society has a kind of this blanketed term for different genders, and in those genders, you have these very narrow, very rigid roles that if you go out of those roles, if you go out of those barriers, you're not oftentimes going to be embraced welcomingly, right? Because confusion discomforts a lot of people. And instead, what I'd like to kind of hopefully everybody walks away with this is this idea of, again, not just options, but also um, understanding that the mental health journey as it pertains to us as men, it's different, but it's also not something that you're actually walking alone. And I have some charts and some data to share with everybody along this conversation. And so, big disclaimer: this is for informational purposes only. As it says there in big bold letters, this does not constitute medical advice or diagnosis. Again, my goal for this discussion is to be able to provide everybody attending with the best information possible. I want you to be able to also understand that your experiences are valid, right? And I don't know who needed to hear that today, but they are valid. They are important, and it's important that you're able to heal. And you're not alone in your mental health journey. Some of the things that you're experiencing currently in the past, some things that you may not have been able to work through, they're more common than you think. And so, again, there are times where we find ourselves internalizing a lot of our traumas and a lot of what we perceived as these very nerve, end all be all, nerve wracking circumstances. And in reality, that's not the case. I feel like if you're able to get out of bed if you're fortunate enough to get out of bed every morning, you're able to start anew, right? And so, another message, another takeaway from this is to always take opportunities to be kinder to yourself. And so, before we really get into it, what I want to do is I want to be able to provide, again, a little bit more of those tools. So for those who need it, it's here. These are resources, or at least what I would consider very pivotal resources for anybody. I don't know if there's veterans, suicidal prevention lifelines.
We have plenty
Oh,
of
awesome.
veterans in our community.
Cool. So there's tons of,
Lots.
yeah, there's tons of stuff here. And the great thing about that is that they're all free, 24/7, 365. And so these all cost you nothing. And I think the newest one, SciComm, which is the link right here in the blue, and then as well as the 988. I don't know how many people are actually familiar with that. That is the mental health equivalent to 911. And so you'll be able to get in contact with a lot of resources through that service as well. Again, these are all free, and they're available at your disposal. And I'll be more than happy to send this off to anybody who needs it.
Yeah.
And so as we get ready to close the month of August, for those who may or may not have been aware, I know I was not, it's National Wellness Month, right? And so it's really, when we talk about Wellness Month, this is from the National Day Calendar. So basically there's this website that goes out and it informs people what type of month it is, depending on the field or the niche. And when we look at wellness, right, we're talking about significant spotlight on self-care, stress management, as well as establishing healthy routines. We all live very busy lives that require us to extend ourselves sometimes beyond our reach. And one of those societal stigmas is that as men, you are supposed to suck it up, right? You're not allowed to complain. You're not allowed to be tired. That it cannot be any further from the truth, right? Like, we're all human. At the end of the day, we all have limits. And part of Wellness Month is being able to recharge and heal, right? So as we close the end of August, what I would like everybody to recognize is that, again, you are not without limits, and in those limits, you are able to rest, you are able to heal, and you are able to prioritize self-care. And I think that's something that as men we don't ever get enough of, and more so we don't ever get told it's okay to rest. And so definitely take advantage of that however you see fit. And along
One of
the
the
presentation,
analogies, one of the
go ahead.
analogies that I've always used when we talk about self-care, because in the stay-at-home dad community, there's a lot of question about self-care because, we're at home, you're taking care of the kids all day. When your partner comes home from work at the end of the day, there's a part of you that just feels like I need a break, but at the same time, they've been working all day. They come home, they want a break.
Right.
And one of the examples that, in our organization we've talked about a lot is we've all ridden on an airplane and we've all heard that safety speech. And they say when the oxygen mask comes down, you have to put the mask on your own face first. And
Absolutely.
then you take care of other people. Because the fact is, if you can't breathe, you can't help anybody else.
You
And
cannot pour from an empty cup.
exactly. I mean, it's the same concept. If
Absolutely.
you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else.
Yeah. And so something else that I do, I actually have a mentee who's very, very bright, very young in her.
Wait, we seem to have
What?
lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Wait, now you came back.
Okay, awesome. So, um, what? Just a caveat off that, mentee, and so to really harp on this concept, I let her know that before we really get started into the work of the lab, teaching you the tools of the trade of research, I want you to at least carve out a full day of just you time, right? I don't want you to, in this 24 hours, you don't need to do anything that involves school, email, the school address, anything like that, because ultimately what happens is, again, we extend ourselves out, and when we pour from empty, you can't really do that, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't help out people um, if you are beyond help, if you are beyond if you're in that burnout state. And so even in the academia, it's still relatively new of a concept of self-care and the work-life balance, especially if you're doing research. But I make sure my student and my students overall, they are being told that, hey, I want you to enjoy your weekend. I want you to, make time for yourself, because if you get burnt out, there's nothing that you can do for anybody else, including yourself.
Yeah.
And that's important. And so one of the things I would like to, shift gears. I want to share this chart with everybody. And so one of the modifications I was able to make was I had this chart that talked about mental health prevalence in the United States, and one of those showed about a 5.7 percentage of the U.S. population being diagnosed with anxiety, right? And so that number can be very misleading, because when you see 5.7, you don't really think that as a big number, but that when I put it and I share it with people in the perspective, that's 5.7 of the U.S. population, right? And so in 2019, we were at 328 million,
Yeah.
right? And so 5.7, I went ahead and I did the math for everybody. That's 18, 19 million people
Yeah.
that are diagnosed with some form of anxiety and or depression. And so this was before the height of the pandemic. And so once, as you can see here, we start off in April of 2020. This chart and this survey was done through a group called KFF. They are a health policy research and polling group that actually does a lot of work with CNN when they run their polls. And so what you see here is this kind of broad up and down kind of graph that shows adults reporting symptoms, right? And so one thing that I want to share with folks is that these are the people that reported it, but there's an even more bigger number of people who have not reported. So a lot of, and I'll share that in a few later slides, there's a lot of the U.S. population, especially with adults and children, that are undiagnosed. And there's a lot of reasons for why that is, and a lot of that comes around, again, it's a very taboo, there's nothing wrong with my kid, there's nothing wrong with me, I just need to toughen up, right? And so again, we get back to this very internalized, very destructive way of addressing issues, and it comes from this lack of self-honesty that we have. We're not really comfortable with saying yet we need help, and there's a lot of that can be said about that. And so the height of which, if you look at from February 2021, you see it's almost at 40%.
Yeah.
Right. And then so currently, as of February this year, we're at 32%, which is a lot better than 39%, but that's still a lot of people. That's still a lot of adults. And also kind of give a little bit of an insight. And again, 2019, we were at 328 million. We are currently at 339, 340 million in the population. And so these diagnoses are only going up. And so when we look at the breakdown of that 32%, the majority of that comes from the age group of 18 to 24, right? And so as the age brackets would go down, or in this case, increase in age, you see that the discussion is kind of being had less and less and less the older that you get, it seems like. But at least from one way of looking and interpreting this information, you're actually seeing that there are a lot younger people having and starting and making the mental health conversation very comfortable and very normalized in the U.S., which is fantastic.
I was going to assume, because
yes.
Again, I'm 51, and I fit in that 50 to 64 range, and I know that when I was growing up, in the 70s and the 80s, I was very much part of that suck it up generation.
Right.
I hear, people talk about ADHD these days, which I was recently adult diagnosed. When I was growing up, I was just a kid who talked too much,
right.
and just needed to learn to shut up and sit down and pay attention in class.
Yup, and some of us got the belt too. Don't forget that. Yeah. So that's a whole nother set of, that could be a whole nother lecture in and of itself, right? Like the discipline as a result of not being able to communicate, or at least being in environments and being from cultures that would downplay some of these symptoms as just, oh, my child, maybe that person is just, they're different, they're weird, they don't know how to behave. So you beat them, right? And so and I think, but what I also what I really like about this chart is, like I said earlier, the younger demographics, they are talking about it, and that's also reflective in some social media platforms as well. And it is becoming normalized, and we are having healthier discussions about healing. So there is a bit of traction that is coming with with the spectrum of mental health, and I think that's great. And so this is again within that 32%. This is the overall breakdown. I'm actually just really happy that regardless of the age and the age brackets that we're looking at in these demographics, the conversation is still being had, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so, with that being said, right, like I believe that ultimately anxiety, depression, I think it'd be very arrogant to simplify it to one single cause, right? It's not just genes, it's not just background, it's just not, you know, an imbalance. It's very multifaceted. And yet, self awareness and self honesty can also be very crucial components, especially with therapeutic approaches designed to work toward these conditions. And so I know a lot of my buddies when they got out of the army, they were told to go to some of these sessions, go to some of these mental health sessions, and they just kind of BS and they lied their way through it. I know that because I was one of them. I really wanted to be out of that office because talking about those things just it stirred up feelings, it stirred up emotions and discussions in my head that I just didn't want to have. Because ultimately it made me feel weaker, right? And so once I was able to get over that and actually not get over, but like really just work through it, but part of that also required me to be honest with myself. And so this is why we have this slide with ourselves, right? Like when we are honest with ourselves, what we're able to do is start to this dialogue of being comfortable in our own skin. I firmly believe that when you run into, I don't know who's familiar with Marcus Aurelius, the meditation, right? And so it's a Stoic philosopher. He was an emperor actually, and he has this. It's a really good book if you get a chance to read it, and it oftentimes sums up this idea of like reflection, right? So as men, when the world is done, when your work is done, you sit in your house, you sit where you're at, and you take time to reflect, right? Like what are some of the things that I accomplished today? What were some of the things that I can improve, right? But part of that is being able to be honest with yourself. And so some of these questions that are on here can be categorized, I would argue, as very proby questions, especially when someone suspects something. So something as simple as, am I okay? We don't always answer that as honest as we could, right? Nor do we answer, how are you doing? You know, and I think in regards to how are you doing, I think that's one of the most common questions where as individuals, we will subconsciously and sometimes consciously mask our true feelings. And so we usually default to, I'm good, I'm fine, everything's okay, but is it, right? We often use that as a deflection rather than a moment to actually process and say, hey, no, this is not okay. And so.
And by the same token, one of the things that I've found is that often when someone asks that question of, are you okay, or how are you doing, they don't necessarily want to start that conversation either.
Right.
Anybody who's actually like bumped into an old friend who says, how's it going? And you just open up completely, sometimes that doesn't get the support that you're looking for.
Right. And so I think in those moments, it's a double-edged sword, especially, that's why I said the how are you doing question. It's a very double-edged sword because on one end, you're like, do you really want to know? Like, you know what I mean? Like if somebody
Yeah.
comes in and asks, like, it's like, do you really want to know how this life adventure of mine, this human experience is going? But I would also ask too, like, if you are asking yourself this, and maybe that time isn't, maybe somebody else externally is asking that, and I acknowledge and I recognize that, you know, you can't always give everybody everything because, how much help is it really at the end of the day? But I think in moments where you ask yourself these questions, um, it's important that we can at least be honest in those regards, not for the sake of being harmful for yourself or harmful to yourself, but because at the end of the day, we want to get better.
Yeah.
We should. And I think everybody does. Nobody wants to be in a perpetual situation of pain, um, internal or otherwise. I think that, like you said, you just have to be very uh, tact. You have to have a lot of tact when these questions are being asked, especially when you have to realize, one, who's asking the question and why. What type of setting am I in where this question is being asked? And we'll also get into where we look at like therapy, right? And so a mental health professional. And obviously, if this is a question that's being asked, this is somebody who's uh, trained, highly trained to, for lack of better terms, handle all the smoke, right? And so, like, and so when I ask, how honest are we? It's not necessarily just from an external probing kind of standpoint, but it's also from this kind of Marcus Aurelius, this stoic lens of when I sit down with myself and I'm reflecting for goals, am I answering the questions the way they needed to be answered? Or am I answering the questions the way that they need to be? Not just so I can kind of trudge along. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. And so the good news, I think this is a really positive slide, is that a lot of that age group that we mentioned earlier, they are receiving treatment. And so this chart, which was done by the CDC, it shows that from 2019 to 2021, we see this huge jump in people very openly having these discussions and seeking help. And that's a great thing. That's the things that we want to see, right? And so, kind of the conversation we were having earlier, where we were looking at that graph and that breakdown of that 32%, and we were saying, hey, the conversation is being had at a younger age and it's becoming more normalized, and that's awesome. And those are the things that we want. I'm not saying, obviously go out and probe everybody you meet, but if the opportunity comes where there's a resource, and maybe you can offer that support.
Yeah.
You might be tasked with that and just like, hey, could you point me where this at? Or hey, I'm really going through something, and something as simple as just being an ear for somebody can traject leaps and bounds for anybody, right? And so I think this is really important that everyone sees that, again, this kind of earlier goal of mine where we talk about not being alone in the mental health journey. It's happening. And so we do see this really nice increase of throughout the years, as the years progress through this age group, of adults seeking help, right? And they're talking about it. And so for us as men, this is another chart, and I'll warn everybody, this can be a little tough, right? And so I have a story about one of these, actually a couple of these bullets of information, right? And so as men, we make up 80% of all suicide deaths in the U.S. These are not, ideations. These are not thoughts. These are, and I use the term not to glorify it, but these are completed. So actual suicides. And yet we only make up 49% of the population, right? When we looked at suicide rates among males in 2020, they were actually 4 times higher than the rate of females. And so a lot of men without a history, and so this is a little bit of the upsetting news, is that a lot of men who have attributed to these statistics, they didn't have a documented history, right? And so when you hear that, what we have to understand is that these individuals, these men, they didn't feel comfortable having that discussion, and that could be for a various amount of reasons. And once I get into one of the stories, you'll understand why. Not all comprehensively, but in one aspect, right? And so, 60% of victims of suicide also not only do they have no documented mental health conditions, they started off as young as 10 years old. So imagine that for a second. Like, let's put a pause on that. So 10 years or older, right? And so when I shared this, I had a gentleman come up to me, pulled me to the side, and he said, at 11 years old, I tried to kill myself. My brother was successful in his 40s. His father was successful with his suicide attempt in his 70s, right? And so what he shared with me was that he came from that environment of the suck it up, boys are not supposed to cry. That makes you, and I'm pretty sure some of you attending can, fill in those adjectives there, right? And so obviously for a lot of, in some cases, we come from backgrounds where the identity and the role of a young boy, you're not allowed to feel anything. You're supposed to work. You're supposed to be the provider. You're not supposed to be tired. You're not supposed to be weak. And these are things that have carried over to some regards into how society sees your role, right? And it's unfortunate that even at the age of 10 years old, we, as a society, we have put so much pressure on children, to where they feel that the only comfort that you can have is take your life. And so, unfortunately, a lot of these suicide deaths are carried out via firearm as well. And in 2019, suicide was the 8th leading cause of death among, again, males 10 and older. And again, I don't share this to, I don't want to kill the party. I don't want to kill the message. But I think if we're really going to have open and honest dialogue about the conversation of mental health, especially as it pertains to us as men, right? We have to get a couple things clear. Like, number one, nobody should be able to influence or tell you what you need to be at the end of the day. And hopefully that if nobody's ever heard that, and maybe you came in late, and I initially started off by saying, like, your experiences are valid. Your healing is solely on you, whatever that looks like. And you're honestly, because you're worth it, right? Like, and so the question again becomes, at what point do we say enough is enough? What point do we sit here and we acknowledge and recognize that as men, as people, as a whole, we are designed different. We're designed to have our own experiences, live lives that are very fulfilling and meaningful to all of us. And so to kind of put us all in this box, to put all men, anything with anything that identifies or, carries that Y chromosome, to kind of subject you to these very unrealistic norms and pressures, not to mention bullying, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, and I think what has to happen is we have to allow ourselves, one, to heal, two, recognize that there are traumas that potentially carried on to us with adulthood, and allow yourself permission to heal, right? Back to the airplane analogy, right? The first thing with that safety, when that mask dropped down, you have to give yourself oxygen before you can assist anybody else, and for good reason, right? You want to be able to provide the most good in the shortest amount of time, and obviously the best way to do that and to amplify that is to be able to take care of yourself. And again, that starts as young as 10 years old. And that's just something I would like everybody to kind of, sit with. And so when we look at mental health, and so now we're at this part where we get to talk, we've spoken about the statistics. We've talked a lot about societal stigmas, the quote unquote norms. What is mental health? What does that look like? What is it that I'm protecting? Why are we telling you, honestly, why are we telling you to guard it with your life, right? When we look at mental health, we're talking about your emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Ultimately, this impacts not just how you think, how you feel, but also how you interact with others. How do you make your choices? How do you handle stress, right? Kind of like this old, not really old saying, but this idea that like you can only love people to the extension in which you love yourself. And so if you run into somebody that happens to be toxic, you're not actually, it has nothing to do with you. And so maybe that's another conversation we have to have. And so, because it's really not normal to go out and make it out your point to just be nasty to folks, right? And oftentimes that can be rooted with something overall being wrong, or something being unsettled or unhealed with that individual, causing that stress. And so essentially when we look at mental health, we're looking at the overall well-being and the effects of every person's life. This is something that affects the aspect of your entire life. This includes, again, not just your thoughts, your emotions, how you engage in relationships, and some of your daily functions. One thing that it is not, however, and I think this is part of that old regime of like how, some of our parents, some of our cultures looked at it, right? It's mental health is not the absence of mental illness, right? But however, it is also the presence of positive factors like resilience, coping skills, and emotional balance. And so, mental health is multifaceted. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to understand that and know that, and figuratively speaking, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's funny because my cat actually looked at me with her ears up as I said that. And so
I just want to know what's the standard way of doing it that everybody's supposed to be thinking of when someone says that.
In regards to, let's say somebody is being very negative.
Oh no, I was referring to literally the cat. I have a dark sense of humor. That's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I think again because we're all very different. At the end of the day, certain things that may be very healing for some, right? And so we'll talk about, let's say, preferred as to maybe not so preferred behavioral traits, but more so we're talking about like healthy activities. This can be something as simple as journaling. This could be something as simple as going to the gym, which has its own set of data, which has been shown to actually help um, release a lot of the hormones and the chemicals that actually figuratively and sometimes literally make you feel like your day's only getting brighter, right? And so, in addition with mental health, we're also going to look at like resilience, right? And so, at the most basic level, when we look at resilience, we're oftentimes referring to the ability to bounce back and recover from adversity and difficulties. And so, over the summer, we had some very interesting discussion with resilience. And so, we'll talk about how resilience is important, but also there's still a limit, right? Because if you're too resilient and you don't address problems, right? And so this is where we talk about what resilience isn't. What resilience isn't avoiding negative emotions or ignoring difficulty. Because what happens is with that is if you go in and you're not able to address conflict, if you're not able to address difficulties, what happens is you don't teach the perpetrator, you don't teach the person accused of it anything. So you have to learn how to still also not just be resilient, but you also have to be able to hold people accountable. So again, with resilience, we're not talking about necessarily avoiding negative emotions or ignoring difficulties, because that's not good either, right? What we want is we want to be able to be very adaptive in challenges, how we perceive traumas, tragedies, and ultimately we want to be able to learn from these experiences. And so consider this idea of the rubber band, right? Obviously, when you stretch it, it comes back to its original shape. With a really resilient people, we find that not just individuals, but communities that are able to face setbacks oftentimes become stronger, right? Again, it's really worth noting that resilience doesn't mean avoiding negative emotions or ignoring difficulties. It actually involves confronting these challenges head on and addressing them in a very productive way. I think a big part of what kind of strengthens that is being able to hold people accountable and being able to set healthy boundaries for yourself. And once you have those left and right range limits, so to speak, what we find is that life becomes a little bit more of the adventure that we want it to be, with those experiences worth sharing with others. And so a continuation with the background of men's mental health across countries, right? And so with this particular literature, I cited it, and so I read it as I was studying up and reviewing this. I kind of had to look back on there. I was like, wait, what? Let me see that. There's so this is one thing to look at it from just a U.S. perspective, but let me see this from a global lens. And so I have the website here with the link that shows and has a really beautiful graph. I wasn't able to fit that on this chart, but it kind of shows how suicide rates are much higher among men than women, right? And so again, we go back to this idea of, we need to destigmatize it. We need to as the conversations, and we need to provide platforms where we can say it's okay that as men you're tired. You're going to be, and so there is the chart there, and what it also shared was that with low compared to first world countries, third world country, and the men that reside in those, they actually those suicide rates are a lot higher. And so, having said that, I also want to point out that mental health does affect everybody, regardless of gender, right? And so I understand and I recognize that although this is a discussion, so for us as men to kind of share about what it means to perceive the stigmas and some of these challenges that we have and allowing ourselves to heal, I also want you to know that, for everybody listening, that it's not a joke. Mental health is not a joke. It's very silent. I don't think anybody leaves that battlefield uncleaved. Nobody leaves the mental health battlefield um,
Without a
scar
scar.
free, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so, as men, although we may experience it differently because maybe there are different stigmas that we have to address rather than our female counterparts, but it does impact everybody. Um, we've already kind of touched on the stigmas and the stereotypes surrounding it and making that more difficult for men to seek that health care. And what I will tell you is that if you are fortunate enough to have access to those resources, and I'll be transparent with my initial mental health journey. You have to be honest with yourself and that provider with how you want the treatment to go. And part of being honest with yourself is, are you going to take it serious enough to actually give it a shot? Very rarely do I meet people, other male, female colleagues of mine, specifically men, that actually take the steps, take the time to actually learn everything from to heart, and they come out they come out so much better. Um, and ultimately, what happens is they love themselves in different ways that they didn't think was possible, and I think that's amazing. Um, Taking care of mental health involves maintaining a healthy mindset, managing stress, seeking support when needed, and also engaging in activities that promote emotional well-being. And speaking of cats, right, we have this idea, right? So the first thing that I would like to share with everybody in terms of how to manage this level of resilience, we have to have a healthy mindset. Part of that includes taking time for yourself, prioritizing sleep, as well as practicing self care. When we look at things like taking time for yourself, that does not mean binge watch a television. It does not mean drinking beer all day, taking in all these very depressive, taking these downers. That's not great for you either, right? You want to be able to spend it and being open to different hobbies and activities. I think at the end of the day, as people, we're very multifaceted. We're not very one dimensional, right? And so, be open to trying out something different. What taking time for yourself does, in addition to reducing stress, again, it improves that well-being, and it releases all those good chemicals from the brain that motivates you, literally brightens your day.
Yeah.
Also, people, it doesn't matter, male, female, however you self-identify, you need sleep. I remember this song called Kevin, from Kevin Gates, and he's about, I don't get tired. Yes, you do. You do get tired. I promise you, I got the data to prove it. Not only do you get tired, you actually function at a weaker capacity the longer you go without effective sleep. So what prioritizing sleep does is it does give you, it literally allows your body to heal throughout
Yeah.
your day, right? And so, and this is crucial, especially when we're looking at mental health, and building that resilience, as well as, when we talk about practicing self-care, we're talking about promoting physical and mental well-being, things that help you feel good about yourself, right? And it's not just spending a bunch of money eating super fancy food and going to these spas, although they help. They are not the end all be all. So do not feel bad if these are not things that are within your financial Wilhelm, right? Like, there are other ways to go out and prioritize your self care that costs absolutely nothing. And I
I'll be
really
the
like.
first one to I'll be the first one to suggest. One of my favorite things to do when I need just me time is to go hiking.
Yes.
There are trails and hiking in most areas. Even if you're in the middle of a huge city like New York City, you can still hike your way down the concrete walkways, but
Hmm.
just getting out and doing it is huge. And just,
Being out
you
in
know,
nature, yeah,
yeah.
being out in nature is like, I think when I look at some of the resources people have, some of the mental health care, long term care centers, they're out in nature, right? And so there's science behind just literally going out and being amongst the trees, like you said, walking trails, taking hikes. Um, Einstein would walk miles from, I think correct, I think about 40, it was about a 45-minute walk, not necessarily miles, but about a 45-minute walk from his house to Princeton University to actually go study. That's a very stoic kind of ritual to have as well, right? Like, I think one other way I heard is called a forest bath, right? So just being out in nature does something because you're not designed. Your very magnificent human system that we all share. It's not designed to sit in a chair and stare at a TV screen all day. So yeah, definitely go out in nature. Nature's a big one. Thank you for sharing that. I think that was an awesome reminder. Um, and so I think with in that in mind, when we look at this picture here, I don't know one person in this photo that's not managing their stress, right? Who, uh, yeah, they're all free falling, and if that's not stressful enough, I don't want to see what the alternative to that is, but um, some of the options that people have, right? Just for example, you have your hobbies. Mine, for example, is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, right? There's something very therapeutic about wrestling another willing human being that makes me feel better, right? And vice versa. And it's just, it's awesome. Playing instruments, again, spending time in nature, socializing with loved ones, right? And so these are all things that that are accessible to us that cost us nothing. Practicing self-care rituals also contribute to a sense of connection, just relaxation and overall well-being. And so, if you get nothing else from this slide, go out, take a walk. 30 minutes, 45 minutes a day does a world of good in the long run. And then also, and I cannot stress this enough, seeking support when needed, right? And so we can get into a very in-depth conversation about seeking support, professional support as well. And it's important to be able to identify those professionals, especially if you're experiencing ongoing distress, anxiety, or depression. I will make one thing clear to everybody in attendance. Seeking help does not make you weak. And I don't know who needed to hear that, but there it is. That's the post for the day. Seeking mental health professional, if you are experiencing these things, does not make you weak. It actually shows a huge sign of strength and the desire to want to put yourself in a better position.
If it was
They
easy, everybody would do it.
Right, and so like what they're also able to do is they're able to provide guidance. They're able to provide insight um, into ways of looking at problems. We don't always, in the moment, we don't always see it that way. We don't always see it problems as an opportunity to learn, right? Because we're going through something that's very significant for us, right? Challenges are not always. You don't always think of a challenge that you're going through. And you're like, you know what? I really like what's happening to me right now, right? It's usually years after the fact that you're like, you know what? I'm glad I went through that because out of it came this. Um, and so I really want everybody, um, have somebody to talk to. Seek that support because if for nothing else, we don't know everything. And so sometimes it's always important, especially if you have the opportunity to go out and find those resources and utilize them to their best, right? Not just for us, but also for our families, for our children, and for those that love us, right? They're rooting for you, and obviously, the alternative of which is, involves looking at some of the charts again that we saw earlier, and so. don't be afraid to seek help, or at least be open to the idea of sitting down and doing a one-on-one, or maybe um, a group setting, because there's so much to benefit, even if that is just kind of being the fly on the wall and just kind of listening, and allowing yourself to put your healing first.
And I mean, I'll point out, at this point, the National At Home Dad Network, we work, one of the main pillars of our mission is support, is supporting one another. And in that regard, every year we throw a big convention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is a breakout every year at the convention that is just referred to as the mental health breakout. Um,
Nice.
and it is a peer support system. We try to get a mental health professional to sit in on it every year. It has become so popular that it is now done as two different breakouts, so that, if it conflicts with something on day one, you can go catch it on day two.
Nice.
In addition to that, we've got a group of the dads in the community who created something called Dad's Gotta Talk. They do bi-weekly mental health check-ins via Zoom, or actually via Blue
Nice.
Jeans for now, until Verizon shuts it down shortly. But they do them via video conferencing, and again, it's nothing more than just a peer support, safe space where guys can come in and have somebody to talk to, and not just keep this stuff bottled up.
Yeah, because it does you no good, especially if you plan on growing from it. Part of being able to grow from things requires you to release it. I remember oftentimes being told, and I don't know who else can relate, you just need to learn how to let it go. And it's like, okay, cool, how?
Yeah.
Like that was always my I would love to, like, but how? And then, the conversation usually became, well, you got to figure that out for yourself. And it's just like, well, okay, thanks for pointing out the obvious, but,
Right.
um, and I think a lot of times what was really rewarding for me seeking mental health services was being able to, um, learn what that looked like for me, and being able to um, share some of those tactics with people that had certain experiences,
Mm-hmm.
um, that we could talk about, and sharing what worked best for me. And I think that's pretty cool that you guys have that available to you. So definitely, let me know if there's anything I can do to help facilitate or promote that work, because it's definitely work that's needed, right? And so, to kind of go into that point where you mentioned that could not convention, but that was those breakout groups, right? Engaging in activities that promote emotional well-being. You need that.
Mm-hmm.
You need those. You need those groups. You need those outlets, because again, if you keep it bottled up, eventually you're going to break. And what happens is, it goes somewhere else. People are very confused, especially when you deal, or have been exposed to those who are successful with their suicide. The biggest comment that's always made is like, I never knew, right? Or maybe if, and so, again, being open to different outlets, being open to new experiences, such as maybe journaling, pursuing different hobbies, participating in volunteer work, and kind of scoping out what works for you, is also being able to engage in what would ultimately promote emotional well-being. And so, in closing, what I want to kind of remind everybody that's attending is, when we talk about mental health, we're also we're really just referring to a person's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. This is something that isn't just exclusive to men. It's not something that's exclusive to women. It's exclusive to everybody. Again, mental health is not one of those. It's not something that you walk away from scratch free. There's definitely moments where we have to talk. There's sometimes we need to talk. There's times when we need to walk away from certain experiences so we can gather ourselves. Um, We just may experience it differently, and the same with our female counterparts. But it does impact everybody. Um, this is something that impacts your overall way of life, not just how you think, but how you handle stress and how you relate to others in making your choices, um, engaging in activities that promote emotional well-being. I cannot stress that enough. Um, a lot of times when we look at our emotional health, we oftentimes kind of neglect simple things, right? Like we don't always think about our breakfast. We don't always think about um, actually getting up in the morning, getting up ahead of everybody. That's also been shown to actually, like, believe it or not, help reduce stress. Getting out for a morning walk, just being able to have that 15, 30 minutes, that time for yourself to really prepare and embrace for the day. And I feel like, as challenging as that may seem, in the long run, you'll always be able to thank yourself for it. I feel like every one of us here is worth that bit of investment. And so that concludes the presentation. Thank you all so much for your attention and your openness to this presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Well, I'm looking. I'm not seeing any questions popping up in the live chat currently.
Okay.
I do have a couple of things that I wanted to add.
Yeah, sure.
Number one is we talk about prioritizing mental health. My wife is a mental health professional. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the phrases that we use a lot in our home is that mental health is health. Like, mental health care is health care. It is just as
Absolutely.
important as, taking care of your body, taking care of your mental state is just as important. And again, you mentioned prioritizing sleep. That is probably the hardest thing for me to do. As a stay-at-home parent, there's this weird thing where at the end of the night, people go to bed and the kids are asleep, and you feel like you finally have some time to yourself. And it's so tempting to just be like, well, I'm just going to stay up until 1 in the morning and do things that I want to do. And then you wake up the next morning and you're just wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tough one.
I had to learn that rule the fun way. Again, so for those who may have came in, I'm a doctoral student, so I can, certain things about prioritizing research and your classes and all, like, it's a lot. And so for that line of work, you have to be very like your brain is that's your money maker at the end of the day. And so for me, in my house, we're in bed by like 10:30 easily, right? And so that's considered a late night. My body, the way I'm set up, I get up at 6:30 a.m. Whether I went to bed at 1, there is no sleep in for me. And so you have to cut that time out for yourself. Also, naps, as silly as that sounds, there's research that shows that naps are golden, right? And
Yeah,
so
so
there's
there's nothing silly about naps, man. I'm
yes.
convinced. I'm convinced that that is the definition of adulthood. It has nothing to do with being old enough to drink or vote or drive a car. It's that moment that your brain goes from, I don't want to take a nap, to, oh my God, I have time to take a nap. That's the moment you
Yes.
hit adulthood.
Yes, it used to be something you fought because I think when you were younger, you thought maybe that you were missing out on something, and now when you're just kind of like, you know what, like, I'm gonna try to set this for 20 minutes, but it's gonna be an hour, right? Like, and so yeah, like I think I feel like sleeping, I feel like nutrition is something else that's also really overlooked. I mean, I recognize that the fast food industry, especially during the pandemic, it's golden. But like when you look at what a lot of this high processed food um, does to your body, in the long and the short term, it's not great, right? And
No.
so another kind of add on to that conversation is, especially when I was starting out in my academic journey, I would tell people, because I'm vegan, right?
Mm.
They're like, the biggest thing is, people are like, oh, isn't that expensive? I was like, well, here's the
No.
thing. Your healthcare is on two forms of bills, either a grocery bill or a hospital bill. At least with the grocery bill, I have a lot more say so than that
Well,
hospital bill.
honestly, I was a chef for 25 years. Veggies are a whole lot less expensive than meat.
I thought, you know what? I thought so too. But like, the people feel what they do about their bacon and their steaks, and
I
I'm
mean,
like,
don't
you
get me
got it.
wrong.
But
I'm very much an omnivore, any of the people who come to the convention know that like my specialty as a chef is charcuterie. So I am the guy at the convention who has a bag of homemade salami and dry cured meats for everybody to enjoy. That wants them, but at the same time in my house, when it comes to nutrition, we follow the easiest rule, which is do 90% of your shopping around the outside wall of the grocery store.
well, the
Because
produce is a
that's where the produce, the dairy, the meat, like that's where all the real food is. When you
mm-hmm.
start going up, the minute you cross and you start going up and down the aisles in the middle, everything becomes processed.
Yes,
And I'm not going to say for 1 second that we don't buy any of that because I have small children and sometimes I don't have time to make tomato sauce.
right,
And there's
right.
nothing wrong with opening up a can, but that can't be every day.
That can't be the default. And again, I feel like when we look at that preventative, that first line of defense, especially like you said, when we look at health, right, as a whole, and obviously my real interest, in addition to mental health, is also infectious disease, and so you arm your body with the ability to do its job, with what you put in it. What is the quality of that food? And so I would actually kind of put that as my walk away charge to everybody, is like I would also, part of that self-care, that wellness promotion, is looking at what you eat and being very honest and like, hey, can I actually, can I meal prep? Can I actually put the right things in my body, or at least work towards a healthier alternative than these highly processed options?
And drink more water.
Please.
Like I don't care who you are. I don't care how much water you drink. You could use more. Um,
Always.
it is shocking how little water people drink in this country.
It's scary. It's actually scary. I did a trip out to Ghana over the summer, and people forget that dehydration is like a whole thing, and that affects your body in different climates. And so for like the United States, for the most part, we can kind of get away with not drinking as much, but once you go into these other countries, such as, like, for example, Ghana, you go to the Dominican Republic, right? Like, these are
Hot
countries that have
places.
heat, right? Like, they have these things that will eat that body, that Uber Eats body alive. Like, you need that water, because your body will remind you very quickly who's in charge
Oh
if
yeah.
it doesn't get enough in it. So liquid IV. I'm not promoting anybody. I don't know if I'm gonna say
No.
that, but recently tried them. They're awesome. So there's like
Um,
this little IV packets. Have like potassium and all this good stuff in there. It's like basically drinking your vitamins. It's pretty good. So definitely, they're finding new ways to make water have flavor. So
yeah.
definitely give it a shot. But yes, please, dear God, drink more water, eat fruits and vegetables.
Well, I took up triathlon during the pandemic because
Okay.
I don't know, you needed to do something. Other people bake bread. I decided that I would try at 49 do a triathlon. And that was the first time that I realized how little water I was drinking.
Oh yeah.
Is, when I went out on a long, I want to say it was my first 50-mile bike ride, and I hit about mile 42, and my body just said, "You're done now."
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I bonked out hard, and immediately after that, like you were talking about the liquid IV, being diabetic, I use one called Nun, Nuun,
Okay.
just because it doesn't have sugar, but it's basically the same, electrolytes that you throw into your water just to help what you're sweating out,
Right.
and it makes a huge difference.
Yes. Yes, it does. But
And,
yeah. Go ahead,
and
sorry.
again, you were talking about things that, you go through the struggle and at the time it doesn't feel good. But in hindsight, like afterwards, you're like, I got a lot out of that. That's triathlon in the nutshell. The whole time you're doing it, you're thinking, what have I gotten myself into? Why am I here? And then you finish, you're like, that's great. When's the next one?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, well, I'm already here. Like, like you said, mile 40, and you're already here. So might as well get something
Yeah,
out
I'm
of
just going to
it,
keep
and
powering through. Look,
absolutely.
Darnell, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. If you don't mind, I would love to forward your contact information to Danny Mercer. He's one of our board members who works with the mental health group. Um,
Yeah.
for him to reach out to you and see if there's any way that the two of you guys could collaborate, because I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So I actually work, so I volunteer with Dragonfly Mental. So that's a whole non works with just everything mental health. Wendy, I don't know if she said she'd be here. I'm pretty sure she is. Fantastic CEO and friend. Definitely, she would love that, and we would love to support any way that we can.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to join us today. We will be back again next month on September the 8th. Our guest is going to be Linda Flanagan, who has researched and written an incredible book called Take Back the Game. It is largely about how money and mania are absolutely ruining kids' sports today. What used to be, let's all just go out and have fun is now suddenly this pressure cooker to kids at younger and younger ages. And, she's written this book that talks about what it is and what we can do to remedy the situation and keep our kids being able to enjoy sport, but not end up being impacted by this negative aspect. And again, that's going to be on September the 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern. So we look forward to seeing you then. On behalf of the National At Home Dad Network, thank you all for your time. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Take care.